It was just after mid-afternoon in Washington, D.C., when the tension that had been building for weeks inside a federal courtroom finally broke. At precisely 2:34 p.m., according to those present, a clerk stood, the room settled into a near absolute silence, and a 12-member jury delivered a decision that will be debated, dissected, and remembered for years to come. Former President Donald J. Trump was found guilty on all charges presented in this particular federal case. The verdict, unanimous after 6 days of deliberations, marked a pivotal moment in one of the most closely watched trials in modern American history. This was not simply another political headline in an already turbulent news cycle. It was a historic legal milestone involving a former president of the United States, a figure who has dominated the national conversation for nearly a decade. The courtroom, filled with attorneys, security personnel, journalists, and observers, became the focal point of a story that reaches far beyond those four walls. As the verdict was read, the gravity of the moment was unmistakable. Legal teams sat rigid, faces composed but visibly tense. Spectators leaned forward, some holding their breath. Outside the courthouse, crowds had gathered, separated by barricades and heavy security, waiting for confirmation of what rumors and speculation had suggested might be coming. When word spread that the jury had reached unanimity, the atmosphere shifted instantly from suspense to shockwaves. The charges considered by the jury had been the subject of intense scrutiny for months. Prosecutors laid out a detailed narrative supported by documentary evidence, witness testimony, and digital records. The defense challenged not only the substance of the allegations, but also the interpretation of events and intent. Over the course of the trial, jurors were presented with hours upon hours of argument, cross-examination, and procedural debate. The prosecution's case centered on federal statutes that they argued had been clearly violated. They walked jurors through timelines, communications, and decisions that they said demonstrated deliberate action rather than misunderstanding or error. Witnesses testified under oath, some recounting conversations and events that prosecutors characterized as critical to establishing intent. In a courtroom where every word was measured and every gesture observed, the stakes were unmistakable. The defense team, meanwhile, countered forcefully. They argued that the case was politically charged, that interpretations of evidence were being stretched, and that reasonable doubt remained at every critical juncture. They emphasized the presumption of innocence and reminded jurors repeatedly of the high standard required for a criminal conviction. In closing arguments, they sought to frame the prosecution's narrative as incomplete and at times speculative. After closing arguments concluded, the jury retreated to deliberate. For 6 days, those 12 individuals carried the weight of the decision. Deliberations in such high-profile cases are rarely simple. Jurors must sift through complex legal instructions, evaluate credibility, and reconcile differing perspectives. The unanimity of the final verdict suggests that whatever initial disagreements may have existed were ultimately resolved. When the announcement finally came, it reverberated immediately beyond Washington. Cable networks cut to live coverage. Online platforms flooded with alerts. Political leaders issued statements within minutes. Supporters of Trump expressed outrage, questioning the fairness of the proceedings and predicting appeals. Critics framed the verdict as evidence that the rule of law applies equally, regardless of status or office. Trump's reaction following the verdict was closely watched. Emerging from the courtroom, he spoke briefly, characterizing the trial as unjust and vowing to challenge the outcome. His remarks were delivered with familiar defiance, underscoring his long-standing claim that legal actions against him are politically motivated. He indicated that his legal team would pursue appeals and explore every available option. For his supporters, the guilty verdict has become another rallying point. Many argue that the case represents overreach and sets a troubling precedent. Fundraising appeals quickly circulated, emphasizing the need to continue what they describe as a fight against political persecution. Rallies and statements from allied figures reinforce the message that this legal battle is part of a broader political struggle. For his critics, the verdict represents accountability. They argue that no individual, regardless of past office, stands above federal law. In their view, the jury's decision reflects a careful weighing of evidence rather than partisan bias. They emphasize the integrity of the judicial process, pointing to the length of the trial and the detailed instructions provided to jurors. As the nation processes the verdict, attention now shifts to sentencing, scheduled for Friday. Sentencing hearings in federal court follow established guidelines, but they also allow for judicial discretion. The judge will consider statutory ranges, sentencing guidelines, aggravating and mitigating factors, and arguments from both sides. Possibilities can range from probation to significant prison time, depending on the specific counts and circumstances. During the sentencing phase, prosecutors are expected to argue for penalties they believe reflect the seriousness of the offenses and serve as a deterrent. The defense will likely present mitigating factors, including the defendant's age, lack of prior convictions at the federal level, and arguments about intent and public service. Character references, impact statements, and detailed legal memoranda may all factor into the judge's decision. Beyond the immediate legal implications, the political consequences are substantial. A guilty verdict in a federal case involving a former president is unprecedented territory. It intersects with ongoing campaign dynamics, party strategy, and voter perceptions. For some voters, the legal developments may reinforce existing views. For others, they may prompt reconsideration or deeper engagement with questions about leadership and accountability. The case also raises broader questions about the resilience of democratic institutions. The United States has long prided itself on the principle that no one is above the law. Yet applying that principle in practice, particularly when it involves powerful political figures, tests the system's capacity to remain impartial and credible. The jury's unanimity will be cited by some as evidence of institutional strength. By others, it will be scrutinized for potential flaws. Legal experts have already begun analyzing potential grounds for appeal. Appeals typically focus on procedural issues, evidentiary rulings, jury instructions, or constitutional arguments. The appellate process can take months or even years, during which enforcement of certain aspects of a sentence may be delayed depending on court rulings. This means that while the verdict is decisive in one sense, the broader legal saga may continue. Public reaction has been swift and polarized. In major cities, demonstrations both supporting and condemning the verdict have unfolded. Social media platforms are saturated with commentary, much of it emotionally charged. The rapid spread of information and misinformation adds another layer of complexity to an already intense situation. Within the courtroom, however, the process followed a structured path. The judge maintained order throughout the trial, issuing rulings on objections and guiding jurors through legal standards. Court transcripts reveal lengthy exchanges over admissibility and interpretation. At every stage, the formal procedures of federal criminal law were observed. The historical dimension of the moment cannot be overlooked. Former presidents have faced investigations and controversies before, but a unanimous guilty verdict in federal court places this case in a category of its own. Historians will likely compare it to other watershed legal events that reshaped public understanding of power and accountability. As Friday's sentencing approaches, anticipation continues to build. Legal analysts are parsing sentencing guidelines and prior cases for clues about possible outcomes. Political strategists are recalibrating messaging. International observers are watching closely, aware that developments in Washington can have global implications. It is important to note that a verdict, while powerful, is one stage in a legal journey. Appeals, motions, and potential negotiations may follow. The defense team has already signaled its intent to contest the outcome vigorously. Prosecutors, for their part, have expressed confidence in the strength of their case. What remains clear is that this case has already left a mark. It has sparked conversations about executive power, legal accountability, and the intersection of politics and justice. It has tested public trust in institutions and challenged assumptions about precedent. As coverage continues, the focus will shift from the drama of the verdict to the specifics of sentencing. The judge's ruling on Friday will shape not only the immediate consequences for Trump, but also the narrative that unfolds in the weeks and months ahead. Whether the sentence is lenient or severe, it will be analyzed through both legal and political lenses. In the end, this moment underscores the complexity of modern American public life. A courtroom decision has become a national event, blending legal procedure with political theater. The unanimous verdict delivered at 2:34 p.m. in Washington will remain a defining headline. Yet the full impact, legal, political, and historical, will continue to evolve long after the courtroom doors close on Friday's sentencing hearing.